And this is somebody's family heirloom. It's a hunk of wood, but it's more than that because Mike's used this with his grandmother, and you don't beat that. So I think what we're going to do is now we're going to make a new one. We're going to model it after this one, right? We're going to use the dimensions and everything from this to craft it. And then I think what we'll do is once we're done, I'm going to do a couple of them. I'm going to do one, I'm thinking of doing one with walnut handles, one we'll do with maple handles. But I think what we're going to do is we're going to give it away. And it'll have to go somebody who will make it a family heirloom and maybe pass it on. So I think the first thing we're going to do is we'll just go ahead and get started here. And we're going to have to go ahead and mark this out.
Okay, so I'm just taking a straight edge roll right here and my marking knife and making corner to corner lines here, which will get center for me. They're a little hard for you to see because I'm using the knife instead of a pencil or something. But I'll come in here and put an awl in the center and we'll figure right out where center is going to be. So I'll just draw these in so you can see them. There we go, that's center. It's a quick way to find center. Take my awl and my little wooden mallet and there we go. So we're over at the drill press and this is the first one, and as you can see here I'm drilling a hole, right? This is a 1/2 inch hole and I'm drilling it down as far as I can drill it. This is going to be for the pegs that hold the handles on. So I'm just advancing my drill press slowly. I've used wooden screw clamps at the bottom there to kind of hold it upright and straight. It's a good way to hold it. Now I couldn't use my actual table to my drill press because it's a benchtop model. So I swung the table around and I'm actually using the base as the table there. We're going to go ahead and just check it, check our depth. Okay, got a little more to go. Now I'm out of travel on my drill press, so what I'm doing is sliding some boards underneath it and lifting it up on the bit so I can drill a little bit deeper. And I'm just using scrap wood as shims. And that'll give me another couple inches of drilling. Now I can go down just a little bit further. I'm going to go ahead and do that to the other side. Now I went ahead and turned a tenon on the end of this and stuck it in my chuck. When I went ahead and did the other 3 rolling pins, I didn't do it this way. What I did is I drilled both holes on each side, right? But before I did that, I just put it between centers, rough rounded it, got it down to like an acceptable roundness. We still had a lot more to go on it, but I brought it over to the drill press, drilled the holes, and then I turned it actually in between a dowel that was roughed down to fit into the one hole and my live tail center on the other side. So basically it just kind of positioned in there and wedged in, and that's how I finished turning the other ones. Went a little smoother that way. It was easier to clean up the ends. You could do it either way though. It really is hit or miss. So I'm marking the final length of the rolling pin. If I'm ever going to do any more of these, I'm going to cut them to length on the table saw first before I go ahead and not worry about trimming them off. I think that will go a little nicer. So I'm just going to take a pair of calipers and go ahead and see what we're doing and check our depths. So I try to bring this down to its final dimension. I got this cheap little caliper to do at the lathe, and so the wood was spinning. It melted. It melted onto the wood. So, oh well. You can use it. I didn't want to take my good set of calipers to the lathe, so I'll take this one. They're just slightly rounded here, so I can... I'll just have to stop the lathe. Okay, now we're down to our final dimension. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a series of, I guess, kerfs you could say, but series of cuts, all down to that dimension. I want this to be as flat as possible because it's got to roll on the counter even, or your dough is going to come out all wonky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a series of these cuts, mark the depth. And now you see here, I have all these depth marks, so it's easier to level off those high spots. Finding the end of the blanket, I'm bringing that down a little. So that's going to be the end of the rolling pin right there. Okay, now you can see what I'm doing is I'm bringing down these high spots to match the low spots. That's a good way of getting this nice and even all the way across. We're going to do something a little later to assure that it's true, but this is a good way to get close. Sometimes it's hard to judge by eye, and I find this works really good for me. It's a good way of doing like coves and stuff too, where you can find the low spots and the high spots and do stuff like that. You can mark the depth with calipers. So this is pretty much even all the way across. I'm just going to come across it and clean it up with a skew. So I'm going to just come all the way across and just clean it up a little bit so I have less sanding to do. Just move the tool rest. I really need to get a bigger tool rest. I only have this 6-inch, and I'd really like to get a foot one, and I should. They're not real expensive. I can get one for about 25 bucks, 30 bucks, and it would save me a lot of moving around. Just taking the skew and cleaning everything up. Taking a scraper now. There were a couple little high spots that I wanted to knock down, and I was able to just clean it up a little better with the scraper. If I was a little better with the skew, I wouldn't really need that. This is sandpaper on just a piece of plywood, and I double sticked it down. And this gives me a nice flat surface across. We want this to be completely flat. So this is going to take away the hills all the way down to where the valleys are. And we can get a nice flat round thing. And I think this is a really good, I like that shot. You can see the dust coming up. But just will give us a nice way of making sure it's completely flat. If it's not flat, the dough won't roll out correctly. Here I'm just taking sandpaper and I'm just knocking off the other grit. I'm not moving a lot, I'm just bumping down the grit. And right here I'm just taking my diamond tool and cleaning this one end up a little. I'll basically bring it down, clean it up a little bit. Round the corners, we don't want the corners real sharp of the rolling pin, so we'll round those a little bit. One of the things I'm working, though I'm still kind of new at the lathe, is I'm really working on getting the surface smoother. When you start, and it's not a bad thing to do because you're learning, is not to worry about it too much. And I let the sandpaper correct any of the bumps. But now that I'm getting more and more into turning on the lathe, you really want to work on getting your finish cuts as smooth as possible, so you don't have to do a lot of sanding. But I really relied on sandpaper to get some of my mistakes out early on, and that's okay. As you build your skills, you won't need that as much. So I really kind of cleaned this edge up, and it really didn't require a whole lot of sanding. The end grain on this maple really kind of worked out real nice. So since the other end on this one is in the chuck, I really just went ahead and kind of cleaned this up by bracing it a little, keeping the speed fairly low, but just knocked this off. I didn't do this on the other ones because I didn't really turn them this way, but I was able to get them pretty close where I was able to really clean it up just with the sanding block once I got them off the lathe. Okay, and I'm basically turning off the other end right here. just pulled it off, and then there's the main body.
Okay, we have the cylinder turned. It's nice and smooth. And now we're going to go ahead and we're going to turn these handles. It's a little late in my shop, and I don't like to use any of the loud power tools past 9 o'clock. So I'm going to go ahead and just turn this big chunk down and make the handles out of it.
So I'm basically just turning down a large dowel here, and that'll allow me to fit the handles onto the lathe. Now, one of the things I did is my first attempt at this, I drilled the holes in the handles to a 1/2 inch, which not thinking they needed to be bigger than a 1/2 inch so I can get the thing through. If you look here, my chuck spinned off, scared the bejeebus out of me.
Holy moly, just screwed right off of there.
Okay, so I'm working on the handle. I have it between that dowel and the live center, the right dimensions, and I'll check it with the caliper. It's a little tapered should be at the ends, but sped this up here just so you can see. I'm checking for the final dimension. Make sure my length is good. There we go. And now I'm just going to basically turn this down. Nice end grain ribbons right there off the carbide. Now that I got the size down, checking with the calipers, I'm going to give it its final shape. I want to round over the front a little, clean up the surface. We're good. So checking with the caliper here, that's going to be the front dimension, and I'm going to just go ahead and kind of round this over. I want it to be kind of a graceful curve. I'm modeling them directly off of the ones that we repaired. Clean up. The more I can get this smooth, the less sanding I'll have to do. So I want to get it at least into its general shape. I'm marking for the decorative piece with a piece of pencil, and as you can see, it's right there. We're going to go ahead and mark that. And I'll go ahead and I'm going to cut that with my diamond tool. My diamond tool just did a perfect job. It almost looks like that's how the original was done, though I'm pretty sure they didn't have the carbide tool when they made that, but it looked identical to the original, so it worked out good. Just going to go ahead, clean it up, and start to part it off. There it is. I'm rechucking it so I can give it a final sanding. Work my way all the way up. I only went to 400 grit on all these parts. Putting some mineral oil on, that's going to be my finish. That's what I like to use for food safe stuff. There it is. That curly maple is very beautiful. It'd be a lot cheaper to make it with regular maple, but it really worked out good. It's very, very stunning. So I'm going ahead now and I'm just turning down these pegs. These are the pegs that hold the handles on. So by this point I was able to actually get to the table saw. This is the next day, so I was able to cut these down where I didn't have to turn massive chunks. And pretty much through this entire project, I used my roughing gouge, and I used my carbide tools from Rockler. I really like the tools. They work really good. They are a little on the pricey side, but I seem to be grabbing for them all the time. Carbide's a little easier to use, I think, when you're starting out. And as I get better at sharpening, I'll rely on my bowl gouges and stuff more. But I seem to just grab for the carbide because I know it's going to get the job done. I also use the skew a little bit. I like the skew. When the skew is sharp and ready to work, it does a real nice job. You just got to be careful for catches, because when you catch, you can really mess up your project, and I've messed up some projects pretty bad catching the skew, but it's a good tool to learn. You can probably get away without using it, but I think it's beneficial. Just used a wrench right there, like we did in the part 1, and that wrench just ensures that I'm down to a 1/2 inch. It's actually slightly proud of a 1/2 inch, but I'm okay. Once I sand it, little sanding brings it right down to a 1/2 inch. There's a little bit of play in the wrenches. So I add a little finish to it. I'm over, just put this in the vise, and I'm just going to part the end off using a little saw. Sand that with a sanding block, smooth it up, put a little oil on it. And on this end, this lower half of the rod, there is no oil. Make sure you don't put any there because that's where your glue is going to be. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut this off. That's the end that's going to go into the main part of the rolling pin. It's just a little marble saw I got, works good. Putting epoxy in here, I did 5-minute epoxy. I thought epoxy would hold and be better under moisture and stuff and for the long run. So just put a little epoxy in there, put in the peg, and I'm going to drive it in. I'm going to grab a little rag to kind of protect the end. On one of them I didn't use the rag, I just hard hammered it, and it kind of gave it a nice rustic look. But on some of them I made sure I protected the end. And I'm just going to drive that down into its finished length. You want to leave a little play. You don't want to go all the way to the bottom because you want the handle to rotate on that piece. So you're going to leave about an 1/8 to 1/4 inch of play. I did a total of 4 of them. This one didn't come out right. For some reason this is crooked, so it doesn't roll very well. I'm going to keep this one. This is going to be ours for me to get the measurements off to make more down the road. The design, I loved it. Simple but elegant, traditional design. So that'll allow me to make more. So I made 3. 2 with the regular handles, and then I did 1 with a walnut handle. Came out pretty. They're pretty expensive for me to make. Not too bad, but because of the curly, you could just use regular wood and cut some cost off of it. The curly maple's pretty expensive. So I turned the one that I fixed, right? I gave it back to Mike, and he made me cookies. So, till next time, thanks for coming to my shop. Good.